What's going on, everybody? Happy Wednesday evening. Today is July 15th. Welcome into part 11 of Don't Call This a Podcast 2020 election mini-series. I forgot, it's such a long and lengthy title. I couldn't even get the words off. I'm your host, Ryan McLaughlin, here in a unironed V-neck, but don't worry about that right now. Focus on what's important. If this is your first time tuning in, we take this Wednesday and every Wednesday to recap the week in politics that was. Joining me as always is Mr. Ronnie Harris.
Hello.
And for the second time now, we didn't run him off last week. Our new co-host, Brandon Pickett. How you doing, Brandon?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So be picking the building. We appreciate you once again joining us. So before we get into things, as always, if you are not familiar with us, you can check our website out, thekidswearcrowns.com. We are a place for, I don't want to say a place for everything because that's way too broad, but we really do cover a lot of things within media, entertainment, and news. And so we just try and do it from a Black millennial perspective. Yay, you unique and brand new. But no, for real, if you haven't checked it out, go to our website, kidswearcrowns.com. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at the KWC blog. Follow myself at RHINE KWC. And Pickett, did you want to give your
Sure. BL Pickett 06.
So BL Pickett 06 on Twitter as well. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're watching this through YouTube, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this through Facebook, click and go to the YouTube channel. Grow those numbers, help us out a little bit. We've had a couple things we pulled up this week, but most importantly, two housekeeping notes. We just put up a video yesterday addressing Joe Biden's platform and 4 of the big items on there. Once this is over with, please go click over. And this Friday, we'll have our second edition of House Party or After Party. I'm sorry. Where this time, last week we celebrated the 90s. This time it's an ode to the Dirty South. So make sure you check that out. Ron's the one that put this playlist together. So it's going to be a good time. I'm going to go in there and mess it up with like some Baby D and some like real Atlanta stuff from like 2002. So anyway, let's get into the news. To start things off, probably the most dangerous thing that happened this week. Donald Trump has alerted the hospitals, especially specifically public hospitals, and we can get into the details in a second, to send all of their coronavirus and COVID-19 data to the White House instead of the CDC. In this unprecedented event, which seems to be growing out of frustration between the White House and science and intelligence, Trump has demanded that hospitals send him their data, which has all kinds of implications that we're going to get to here in a second. Isn't everybody just happy and great? The curve bent the other way. So now we're going to see what the results of this are. Brandon, how nervous are you about this whole rerouting of data? There's no foul play here, right? We're just being paranoid, right?
No, we're not being paranoid. It's incredibly troubling that they are choosing to do this. It's going to produce, I think, the exact opposite effect of what they are trying to do. So what I think you have is just a failed response by this administration to act early to protect American lives. They lie almost daily to the American people about almost everything. But the truth about this threat, the threat that this virus poses in particular, all presumably, I think, in an effort to control the narrative as we get closer to the election. It's classic Trump, right? He's putting short-term personal interests ahead of quite literally everything else, including national security, including the safety, health, and well-being of the American people. I think it's quite short-sighted and it's misguided, to say the least. Instead of his stated or his goals, I think, of shielding his gross incompetence, I think it's likely to reveal further that this president cannot be trusted to do what's right when it matters. We can only hope that that fact is foremost in the minds of voters when they cast their ballots in November.
Ron?
Yeah, Brennan mentioned an interesting point. It's actually going to have an adverse effect because something you simply can't forecast is how this thing is just bringing communities together. Like, for instance, this is only a microcosm of like the entire nation, but the most accurate news regarding COVID-19 is coming out of this Facebook group It has the spokesperson for the local hospital and also local urgent cares, and they are reporting data daily. So if they're submitting these numbers nationally, and we know this hospital is right here, but the numbers we're getting back from the president's reports are matching up with what we're reporting on a local level. And then, of course, yeah, people are going to look at this funny. So I think he's definitely trying to say like, hey, look at this problem is going away, because apparently there are the theories out there that the numbers are being inflated or whatever. But yeah, I do think that it's going to have a negative effect on what he's trying to do, and yeah, I mean, it's very clearly a method of like yeah, just trying to suppress the data that's out there, instead of trying to fix the problem.
Well, in a surprising turn of events, Mitch McConnell has actually come out in support of Dr. Fauci, who's been under attack from the Trump administration, well, specifically Donald Trump, over the last few days for the way that he's basically been telling the truth and being popular. Is really about all I can get out of it. So this kind of goes hand in hand with that, right? Like we are seeing again a party and a president in particular who is denying science on every single level at every single chance that he can get. And in return, we're getting people who are distrusting of science and data, who don't quite understand the way these things operate. We've been saying for how long that a lot of COVID-19 data is delayed by about a week or two, just depending on how long it takes for it to develop in the individual, and then that person to be hospitalized and that data to be recorded. But it's hard to combat misinformation when the person in the White House who has the largest access to media as a whole is readily spitting out that misinformation. Mm-hmm. And so you'll see it. I mean, you'll see, shout out to Sherry and Long, who is who's been a co-host on here before, who's been a guest on here before. Within his group City to City, I've seen a post where inside there was somebody advocating that, well, Trump's not really running the show, and, all these kind of like conspiracies that have no proof to them, right? And so this just makes it worse. Like you said, Ron, this is him trying to short-sightedly play up things before the election. Oh, look, the curve went down. It's safe. But he can't think further than 24 hours ahead. Mm-hmm. And so the issue at hand is going to be, you're going to see kids get sick as we force the reopening of schools. You're going to see that affect parents and families in a major way, because those families will get sick themselves. And people are going to remember what he and Betsy DeVos sat up there and said for weeks on end before school started. So he thinks that people will just forget. But there's one thing that people will not forget, and that's honestly their own personal health. Everything is a faraway issue. Everything is a far off issue until it hits home. And this COVID-19 coronavirus, it's all hitting home, and people are seeing just how badly botched this was. All right, we'll move forward to more positive news. The Biden-Sanders task force has announced their top priorities, including a really aggressive change to Biden's climate change plan, which I do want to say, by the way, Biden had already a pretty aggressive climate change plan, but this climate change plan that he and Sanders put together moves the timeline up. So instead of 2050 being the target, it's 2035 for net zero emissions. But the big part is a $2 trillion investment over 4 years that would set the mile markers and the goals for the eventual net zero carbon emissions by the end of Biden's first term. So that is a huge, huge deal. I do want to get your responses to that before we kind of dig down the list. So Ron, we'll start with you this time around. Seeing that climate change, seeing the climate action portion of this Biden-Sanders task force, how did that make you feel? What were you thinking as you read it?
Oh man, I love it. This is what was missing in 2016. And you can either blame Hillary or Bernie, whatever. But yeah, this is what was missing in 2016. Really patching together this party, and my view of just Biden and the campaign he's running and his platforms are drastically changing from where they were like a year ago. Maybe I was like, Biden isn't going to be the candidate that's needed post-Trump, but he's proving to be otherwise. He's being quite progressive with his platforms. And I also love, aside from that, I also love the politics of it, because he's saying, okay, I'm working with Bernie, but at the same time, he's saying I'm not committing to this, to this, to this, and to this. And I think that's important, because he is currently being attacked about being too left leaning right now. So it is important that he gets out in front of this and forms his task force with Bernie, but at the same time, not show his hand too much as far as like being too left leaning, because that will turn some key voters away. So yeah, like, I love the task force itself, and I love just the politics of it. And who knew, man? Joe Biden it surprised me right now. Who knew?
Brandon, sorry, I forgot I was muted.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what Ron said is right. It's encouraging to see the outreach to the left from I guess the center wing of the party early on, and for the reciprocation from the left side of the party to the center early on. Right. I don't think we saw that in 2016, and I think that was part of the problem. So you see a coalescing around Biden that you didn't see in 2016. But for me, this issue, I look at this issue from an environmental justice perspective. And we all know that low-income families and communities of color have higher rates of many health conditions. They're more exposed to environmental hazards. And we know that they take longer to recover from natural disasters when they happen. So all of these issues are made worse or exacerbated by climate change. So these issues are important to consider when thinking about for whom you cast your vote in November. In a recent interview, one of my favorite people in the world, Angela Davis, said that she, and this is a quote from her, direct quote from her, she said, "I don't see this election as being about choosing a candidate who will be able to lead us in the right direction. It will be about choosing a candidate who can be most effectively pressured into allowing more space for the evolving anti-racist movement," which I think environmental justice has a key role to play. And so I think the emphasis here needs to be on who has a seat at the table when we're developing solutions that will combat the climate crisis. So, and out of the choices we have, that seems clear to me who the better candidate is.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. I think there's something important to note, and I covered this in the video that we posted yesterday, so make sure y'all go watch it. But as Brendan mentioned, there's a huge tie in climate action, climate change, and environmental racism and environmental damage. There's actually a big part of his not just climate platform, but infrastructure platform that involves communities of color, because it's directly noted in the platform that they have been the most affected by pollution, by these different environmental hazards and actions. So I think when you identify these things and you note that this is something that this is a consequence of these actions, of these actions, then I think that allows more people to really see and understand that you are trying to actively fight for them. And I think that's one of those things that we want to dispel, right? Like, I think a lot of people get caught up and say, well, it's always the what you going to do for me. But I think now you can point to it and say, yo, look, these are things that historically have been a problem, have been an issue. And we now have an opportunity with somebody to at least begin fixing them. So a couple other things to highlight with this task force. For one, with Biden's public option that he's been pushing for, one of the recommendations of the task force was to offer certain prescription medicines without out-of-pocket spending. This would be similar to certain Medicare programs. And then he wants to allow Americans to become eligible for Medicare starting at 60 instead of 65, and then also to cover treatment for dental, vision, and hearing loss. Along with that, criminal justice reforms. Of course, Biden has wanted to end private prisons and cash bail. But additional recommendation from Sanders' force is mandatory minimum sentences, let me see. I'm sorry, I missed department there. Federal standard for police departments' use of force, national database of police officers who commit misconduct, and end to sentences of life without parole for juvenile offenders. And then if we already talked about climate change, so there's a couple other things in there. Decriminalizing marijuana is a big one that we've talked about before. It would not make it legal, so to speak, federally, but it will decriminalize it federally, which is a huge step. And then, of course, it'd be up to each individual state, unfortunately. So those of us in the Southeast, it may still be a little bit before we see that be fully legalized. But education-wise, a couple of things that they want to note in here to de-emphasize standardized testing, to significantly increase funding. Then you have the universal free tuition at public colleges if you are a family of under $125,000 per year, free community college, an extensive investment in vocational programs for high schools and things of that nature. So this is a pretty robust plan that he and Sanders came together for. And I am pleased with all of the different outcomes. Brandon, I didn't know if there was something else that you saw in here that stood out to you that you wanted to bring up or talk about.
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
All right. Well, cool. So let's go ahead and move toward the election itself. Cook now lists Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona as toss-up states. And get this, Joe Biden now has a 13-point lead in Pennsylvania. Brandon, you weren't involved with it earlier this afternoon, but we were explaining to the younger fraternity brothers today, or some of the other fraternity brothers, about the differences between the 2016 election and the 2020 election, and just sort of the differences in how the polls are being forecast and everything like that. As you see this data, you who has this finger right on the pulse of election coverage, of election data and information, what are you feeling when you see these official declarations of toss-ups in a state like Georgia?
I mean, I think it's important to put these things in perspective, right? Like Trump won Georgia, I think, by 5 points last time, North Carolina by 4, Florida by 2, Arizona by 3, and he barely eked out in Pennsylvania. I think it speaks to a larger issue that Donald Trump is losing so handily in states that he carried in 2016. One, I think we discussed this last week. He doesn't have in an opponent like Joe Biden what he had in an opponent like Hillary Clinton, right? He was able to demonize Hillary Clinton in a way that most voters just don't believe him to be, or he's not been effective in doing to Joe Biden, right? But the larger point I want to make is that I think it just shows how deeply distrustful the country is of Donald Trump, right? They've had 3.5 years to assess him as not just only a person, but as a president, right? Before they didn't have that knowledge. They were willing to give him a chance. And now when you see what he's done to this country in terms of, I mean, you can literally point to anything by every metric almost, we are worse off than we were in 2016. And people are I think over it, and that's what you see in the polls. I would caution though that we are still far out from the election. It is getting closer, but we are far enough to where things could change swiftly if something were to happen. And I do think we're reaching the point of no return, but we're not there yet. And so I would caution people to continue paying attention, to keep the foot on the pedal, and not let up until after they casted a ballot on November 3rd or prior to, if you are doing vote by mail or early voting. Until this thing is in the bag and it has been called for Joe Biden, it is important that we continue the fight, period.
Ron?
Yeah, I think that's very important because, like we said last week, once you hit like that Labor Day period, it's a wrap. But what I'm interested in right now is the margin of error for these polls, and the leads are so substantial for Joe that it's looking really promising. But at the same time, like you said, we have to make sure that everyone who can vote, will vote. And I think right now Trump knows that's his game plan. We see it. This isn't like conjecture. It's just suppression. Let's make the road to voting as hard as it can possibly be for the American people. So that's his game plan right now. We see it with basically forcing people back into workplaces, forcing people, basically everything that's going on with COVID right now. But these leads that Joe have, they're looking very promising. And I'm going to say this every episode. I am a pessimist, but I'm starting to say like, hey, maybe, just maybe. But yeah, it's going to take a concerted effort on everyone to just make sure that, hey, everyone that can vote, we can make sure that they have all the information they need and also all the resources they need to actually get out and vote on that day. Because these polls are just opinions, they're just projections, they're just forecasts, but we need to make sure everyone can actually cast their vote. So, but with that said, if everyone does, it's looking pretty promising right now.
Look, I say this every single week. And it's to the point where it baffles me every time. But the fact that this guy can't see beyond the next day is what is really baffling to me. He's continuing to try and force things that are proven to not work. There was a quote yesterday. I can't think of where it was sourced from. I'm sorry. I try not to bring quotes out the wild. But basically, they asked somebody, a Republican official, is there anybody around in the administration that's going to lend a voice in his ear to say what you're doing isn't working? And he said, basically, no. Everybody with that sense is gone. He's pushed them all out the door. And so he just keeps on. He's barreling down a cliff. His engine is on fire, and his solution is just to pour gasoline on it and hope that it just burns out before it goes off the cliff. Like, that's the craziest part to me. You're wanting kids to go back to school. You're wanting to act like the virus is not here because in your worldview, you can limit your interactions to it. You don't have to deal with it, but other people will. And there was a story in Syracuse the other day of the child who got dropped off at daycare who was asymptomatic, but the parent had to go to work. And that in turn infected 4 different families. There's 16 people in total. 4 people in 4 families got infected because of that one child. And so you're going to see that on a scale that's unfathomable. And you're going to have more. It's not just the deaths, because people keep trying to cite faulty death numbers of, it's a 1% mortality rate. This is something that is leaving people with organ damage. Like, this is no joke. So people are going to remember this. And the more he tries to lay into this and the racism, the more he's losing the people who got him the win last time, the suburban white people, particularly white women. And it's insane to me, because the viable strategy here is shut it down for 3 weeks or for 2 weeks, send out another stimulus package, do a national mask mandate, and make sure that while you are on your shutdown for 2 weeks, you are putting forth the means necessary to increase testing and contact tracing. I mean, this is stuff we should have done 4 months ago, and it won't have the effect now that it would have had then, but you still could at least suppress the effort. And people are starting to break from him. His attorney general is sitting up here saying, hey, wear masks for 3 to 6 weeks. We can make this go away. And he won't do it.
It's always interesting to me when people say it's only 1% will die, right? Like, I always want to ask, like, are you willing to be in the number, right? Because 1% of 300 plus million people, that's millions of people. If you're willing to allow millions of Americans to die, then I question all of what you said in the past about Americans dying overseas at war and, any life,
being pro-life.
Being pro-life. I mean, every single American life and life in general is valuable, right? And it's not up to us to choose who dies. Just wear a damn mask.
That's it. That's all you have to do. And I think that's what bothers me most of all too. Ron, were you gonna say something? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I just echo that sentiment. And I think what we have now is just the perfect storm of everything that's happening. because we do know what the game plan would be if all things were said equal. So yeah, those attacks aren't landing right now because a lot of his base there, and that $1,200 stimulus check was a long time ago. I mean, it really wasn't a long time ago, but it seems like it. So yeah, I think the average person they're realizing like, hey, like maybe this administration doesn't care about me as much as I thought they did. And I think that's starting to reflect in what we're seeing because a lot of people who normally would be in his base, they're starting to speak out now. And I didn't get to mention this earlier, Ryan, but I do think Mitch going a different direction. That may be the death knell. We don't know yet, but it's interesting that he chose to say something that's in the opposite direction of where the president's going. So we'll have to see how that develops. As well.
After 3.5 years of being in his corner and leading the charge, that what scares me about that is McConnell's going to get away with this, and then that's what's bothering me is that I want him to go down with the ship. You captain this thing for 3.5 years. I want you, and I wish a lot of I don't want to say I wish a lot of people were more engaged, but I do wish a lot of people were more engaged to see what's happening because I've seen a lot of times where people say, this government really doesn't care about us and they only passed one stimulus check and it's half the story. In the same, it's that thing where it's like, we know the GOP strategy is to make people cynical about government, right? If they're cynical about government, they're less likely to want to be involved and bother with any change because anything negative that happens, well, that's our government. Right? If nothing happens, that's the way it's always been, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've been trying to drive the point home to people. The HEROES Act has been sitting on the table for 2 months. And Senate Republicans didn't pick it up. And now they're talking about, I guess we do need to do something. That's what bothers me, is you have one party who has said that won't be enough. We need more. And you have another party that said, no, that's enough. We'll give it to the businesses and all that kind of stuff, but we ain't giving it to the people. And I think that's what bothers me most of all is McConnell, who's the main one that's preventing that from happening, is going to get off scot-free because he's breaking with Trump 4 months in advance of the election. And it bothers my soul. It just bothers my soul.
One thing I think we're missing here is that Mitch McConnell is in a race right now with Amy McGrath. That he could very well lose. You have to remember too that not long ago, Kentucky just elected a Democrat governor, right? Mm-hmm. I think Andy Beshear won by I think it was like 5,000 or so votes, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a real possibility that Mitch McConnell could lose his Senate seat, and so when he sees Donald Trump going down. He's making the only political calculation that he has, right, is to move as far away, as slowly as possible, but as far away from Donald Trump as he possibly can, as to distinguish himself. So I think that's something to be said about Mitch McConnell's motivations.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty clear. I think you're right that he's got that challenge coming from Amy McGrath, and we don't know how that could turn out. I would love to wake up on November 4th, and Biden has been elected president, and McConnell's lost his seat, and Kelly Loeffler is out of here, and so is Doug Collins. He's gone, and Doug Jones keeps his seat, and I would love a Democrat presidency and a 55 seat majority in the Senate. I would love it, but I'm not holding my breath. So I hope we can at least get 2 of those. Which is a majority, and then Biden. And if McConnell's still there, okay, whatever. I'm not really worried about it then. But yeah, I'm with y'all in the sense that there's a reason why he's breaking now. All right. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of Doug Jones, particularly the state of Alabama, Governor KIV finally did a bare minimum mask mandate. If you haven't seen this yet, it went into effect in the state of Alabama about an hour ago. And it, on one end, I guess, congratulations on doing the bare minimum, but it gives so much leeway, including religious beliefs, or if you have health concerns or health problems, or, children 6 or younger. Okay. I mean, that's understandable, but then just don't bring the kids out if you can. But just, it's like, oh, wow, the pipe burst and the water is flooding out. Here's a piece of string. So, Brandon, Ron, you two are living there. At least you have a mask mandate. My governor has been hiding in his version of a bunker for about 2 months now. How do you feel now that Governor Mima has put that forward?
Okay, because there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah,
a lot, because her safer at home order, the first phase was fine. The first phase was fine. She was actually being commended on how well she was handling the first phase of this. Look at those numbers in comparison to now. Okay, so we shut down with, like, for instance, I think at that time, my county had 70 confirmed cases, like during that entire span. But then she shifted to phase 2 of her safer at home order, which is basically, hey, open everything back up. So if the second phase of that plan would have included a mask ordinance, then I think we would be in a lot better position now. But basically, to answer the question that you asked, which is about this particular mask ordinance, one thing I hate is fluff. So this is just let's say we're doing this, but hey, you really don't have to do it. You really don't have to do it. And then just the total mess with Will Ainsworth, like, that's an entire episode by itself. But yeah, it's a mess right now. And this is like I said, this is just to say that we're doing it. It's not like, basically there's no language as to what happens if you don't do this, because it gives you the leeway to, like, opt out of it due to like religious objection, which sure, due to health issues. And of course, a lot of people are gonna say, like, oh, I can't breathe in my mask, so why wear it? But let me stop rambling, because like I'm just so confounded by KIV and just this entire state and what it's been doing during this period. I can ramble on all day, so I'm gonna defer now.
I would say, to be clear, anything is better than nothing, right? Like, if you have a mask ordinance and it is an order from the governor with the full weight of the law, then most people are going to comply, right? The percentage that won't comply probably weren't going to comply regardless. But to Ron's point, this mask ordinance is laughable, to say the least, right? Think about it. It went into effect today, and it only runs through the end of this month. What? I mean, who thinks we're going to be out of this crisis at the end of July, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, Alabama has more than now 59,000 cases, more than 1,200 deaths. Yesterday alone, 40 deaths reported in the state of Alabama. 40 deaths. That's a lot of people. Our hospitals and ICUs are becoming overwhelmed, and which only means that the death cases are going to go up drastically if we continue down this path. The order doesn't have a clear enforcement mechanism, as Ron mentioned. So it's basically business as usual in good old Alabama.
I want to highlight real quick, because I want to give praise to the Alabama Democrats Twitter account.
Oh my God.
I want to transition real quick, because for those of you that don't know, Tommy Tuberville won the Alabama Senate Republican primary runoff yesterday, defeating Jeff Sessions pretty handily. And Alabama Democrats Twitter account, which these tweets have happened over the course of the last week, but they are just chef's kiss perfection. The first one that I love is, it's simple. Want to help Doug Jones beat Tuberville like Nick Saban did in his last Iron Bowl? Here's our SoundCloud. They have the donate link. He lost his last Iron Bowl 36-0, collects millions of dollars in pension money from hardworking Alabamians, and bilked investors based on their trust in his investment advice. Tubbs, Doug's going to run through you like Fred Talley at an 11 a.m. Jefferson Pilot game. Here is the best one to me. Tommy Tuberville said he'd leave Ole Miss, quote, in a pine box. Days later, he left for Auburn. Never told his players goodbye. At Auburn, he had a wandering eye every year. At Texas Tech, he ditched a recruit during dinner to leave for Cincinnati. Wonder who he's lying to now. Perfection.
And for those watching, I'm compelled to highlight this as well. So in Alabama, let me make sure I'm getting this right. Long story short, too long, don't read. But long story short, Tuberville actually resides in Florida. He lived in Alabama for one day, just so he could run for Senate in Alabama.
I just want people to know that this is the outcome that Doug Jones wanted. This is the outcome that he wanted. This is the easiest one to pit against, right? Like, there's so much stuff you can use to use against Tommy Tuberville that he just gives you ammunition for. For one, he has no experience, but number two, he has no platform. Like, he's just spouting out right-wing memes at this point. He's just spouting out church, Jesus, no abortion, I love Trump. Like, that's all he is doing, and it's so easy to see through. And it's going to be a close race because it's Alabama, and it was a less than a percentage win against a pedophile, but this is the outcome that bodes a better chance of Doug keeping his seat, simply because it was going to be hard to tell the people, the Republicans that sat out last time, no to Jeff Sessions, who they are familiar with. It's that familiarity. So Pickett, I don't know how much of it you can comment on about this race in and of itself, but how do you feel about the prospects now that it's Tuberville versus Jones?
I always thought it was going to be a hard race for Doug Jones, and I still think it is going to be a hard race. I don't think you can underestimate the power, the stronghold that Republicans have on this state, for one. But I do think there's something to be said about Tommy Tuberville and his, like you mentioned, his lack of platform, right? Like, the guy literally talked about nothing the entire campaign, right? He tried to make a joke of his campaign bus catching a fire. And I just don't think that any reasonable, Doug Jones has made a name for himself in the Senate, passing over 18 bipartisan bills, right? Like, bills that actually go to help families in Alabama who need it most. And I think he has distanced himself from just the partisanship that you often find in electoral politics, especially in the Senate. And so I think Doug Jones has a good shot. I think he really does have a good shot. But it's going to take all of us who showed up in 2016 or when he elected, whenever the special election was. 2018. Thank you. To come out and vote again, and to be clear with our friends about the stakes. Doug Jones has not been this rampant liberal that most people on the right tried to make him out to be. Said that he was going to go to the Senate and do. So I think people are mostly clear-eyed about it, but I don't think we can take our eyes off the ball.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, and Ron, I'm gonna get to your opinion here in a second. The bills that Jones has sponsored have primarily been finance and financial sector, education, health, and then armed forces and national security. Those are the top four. And if you want to go to a fifth one, it's foreign trade and international finance. After that, it's social welfare, labor, employment, and taxation. Like, those are the bottom three compared to what he's done. I think his the five primary bills that he sponsored are the Aging Together Act, Rapid Coverage for Coronavirus Vaccines Act, Military Widows Tax Elimination Act, Civil Rights Cold Case Records Collection Act, and Rural Health Liaison Act of 2018. Just put it on the screen. Like, put it on the screen for a commercial. This is what I've done. What has Tommy done? What is Tommy going to do? Who's Tommy going to work with? Like you said, Brandon, I've reached across the aisle. I've worked with Republicans. What is Tommy going to do? They don't want Tommy. Like, I don't, so whatever. Ron, please, follow me.
Tommy also doesn't have a job.
Tommy does not have a job. I need the Photoshop. I need the Photoshop now. I need somebody to Photoshop.
Yeah, I'm just hoping Doug watches Tommy like USC would have watched 04 Auburn. But anyway, but I do think that this can be potentially dangerous because we are very close to having just a complete loon who parrots the president with the Senate seat. So yeah, that's dangerous in itself. But yeah, I do think because of Doug and who he is, and he has accomplished a lot, but at the same time, he's quite moderate. Like day one, he says like, "Hey, I'm a moderate, so don't expect don't expect too much left leaning from me." So I do think he still has a shot, and let's just hope the Trump kiss of death works here because I don't have the numbers, but most people Trump has endorsed, it hasn't worked out for them. So let's hope that's the case. But we'll see. I think it's going to be close. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it'll be relatively close.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be close. I was fearful that a Sessions nomination would be a blowout the other way. That's what I was scared of. But I think now that Doug has a record and somebody else doesn't, he can make a case within the state that I am not some crazy liberal progressive. Ideologically, he's further to the right than some Republicans are. If you look at the bills that he sponsored, especially somebody like Suzanne Collins or Murkowski, he's a little bit further to the right. So it's cool. We need that vote in the corner because we know that Jones will vote for a climate change bill. We know that Jones will vote for a public option healthcare bill. So we need that number. And Jones is also just a good guy, and I want him to succeed. I want him to be back in that place. Okay,
I think that's the most important point, right? Like I don't think Doug Jones. Of course, every politician calculates, but I think Doug Jones really takes his job seriously, and he does what he thinks is right, and that's all you can ask for in a politician, in a leader in general. So,
yeah. I think he is one of the purest, and this might just be because I've followed him longer than I followed any other individual, senator or anything like that. But I think he's one of the purest, politicians that we have out there who is actually operating off of what he thinks is best for people and not trying to play partisan games or anything like that. So right. I do applaud him for that. I really do. And I think it should be, commemorated. And I hope Alabama does the right thing. And I hope Black women save us yet again.
They always do.
They always do. If there's one thing we know, it's that they will show up. So we have to do our part to make sure that their showing up is not in vain. All right. That's our show today. I want to thank y'all for joining us. Again, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't done so already, like our Facebook page. If you haven't done so already, The Kids Wear Crowns. You can go facebook.com/kidswearcrowns. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Ron, as Ron already put down there, at the KWC blog. You can follow Brandon BL Pickett 3 on Twitter. You can follow myself at RHINEKWC. Friday, it's the after party, celebration of the Dirty South. We're gonna do it the way we've always done it for the last week, and have a good time. One other thing I do want to mention. So show's gonna look different for the next couple weeks. I'm gonna be out. My next child is coming, so I'm forming a basketball team. But my daughter will hopefully be here Monday night. And so with that being the case, I will be out for the next couple weeks while I try and readjust to having an infant. Right after I just got through with the toddler stage. So yay, good times.
That means you're stuck with us. No, sorry. No, Ryan, just stuck with us.
So, hey, Brandon, Ron, anything y'all want to promote before we get out of here? Anything y'all want to say?
Go vote.
Yeah, I'm gonna hype you up, Ryan, because you dropped a comprehensive, very just information-packed video detailing Joe Biden's platform, and it is on our YouTube page. So all you got to do after this video, just click on our channel, go straight to that. He lays everything out wonderfully. So and feel free to share that, because sometimes you may not want to go through the nuts and bolts of an actual platform and read just the language, but the way Ryan lays it out, I feel like the video needs to be shared. So Ryan's not gonna hype himself, so I'm gonna do it for him. So please go watch that video, educate yourself, and like Brendan said, please go vote.
All right, everybody. Well, they will catch you next week. I won't be here. But we always appreciate y'all tuning in. As always, you can find the podcast on Spotify or Apple, or our website, thekidswearcrowns.com.
Peace.
Peace.